Well, welcome back, everybody. This is Robert Pascuzzi, and I'm here with Kelly Pascuzzi, and we're really excited for today's episode. So it's great to have you back. And before we introduce our guest, just wanted to remind you that to make sure that you like and subscribe on YouTube and follow us on our social media websites, if you would, Instagram and Facebook at Time for Forgiveness. And obviously, the word of mouth is how we kind of grow here at Time for Forgiveness. So sharing this with your family and friends, we really appreciate that if you're benefiting from what we're doing. All right, well, today we have Ann Marie Malone. And Ann Marie, welcome into Time for Forgiveness. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Hi, Kelly. Hi, Robert.
Hi, we're glad you're here.
Okay. Well, Ann Marie, like some of you out there that might be thinking about sharing your story, that's what she did, and we thank her for that. She had the courage to message us on our website and wanted to come on and talk about her life journey, and that's really how we all learn and grow here. We're inspired by other stories and their courage, and certainly you're going to hear about Ann Marie's today. And so Ann Marie wanted me to introduce her this way. She's an everyday person committed. Sorry, Ann Marie, we're going to edit that. But Ann Marie, an everyday person connected through the Holy Spirit. Can't read my own handwriting. That learned that forgiveness is valuable. Okay, so here we go. Ann Marie is an everyday person committed and connected through the Holy Spirit, and through that she has learned that forgiveness is valuable, which it obviously is. Mm-hmm. And so Ann Marie, I think what we're going to do, and we appreciate you sharing your background and a little bit about what you've gone through since childhood up to adulthood. And so Kelly's going to jump in and kind of place us right in your story, and we can kind of roll from there. So Kelly, go ahead with your first question.
So Ann Marie, I had start over. Sorry. Ready. Ann Marie, you had mentioned that you believe you're sharing your story, so it allows you to move to forgiveness and also make new choices, and hopefully will open up our audience to possibly make new choices in their lives too. I had read that you grew up with physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. You had mentioned that your parents lived a very chaotic life, which also, wow. I got to get on my game here. Okay, I got to start. Here we go. I know. Okay. Ann Marie, you had mentioned that you believe you're sharing your story because it's part of your forgiveness journey. It's also helping you make new and different choices in your lives. And we are grateful for you being on today because I believe our audience, through your story, is also going to be encouraged to possibly open up to some new choices in their own lives. But I'd like to start. You had mentioned you grew up with physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. You had shared that your parents lived very chaotic lives. So obviously the environment that you lived in was very chaotic. You had further mentioned that your early years were filled with uncertainty, neglect, and abuse. And I'm sure that some of our audience can resonate with some of this, but I would like if you'd be open to opening up your story, kind of where it started, so we can also hear how you got to the other side and maybe those tools that you can share to our listeners.
Okay. Well, as you said, growing up, I'd like to have a little caveat here saying that, there's a lot of people who grow up in these types of environments, and I don't think that is the thing that defines you. And yes, I did grow up in an environment where my father was an alcoholic, my mom had mental illness, and it was undiagnosed. And because of that, was a very violent person. And so there was neglect and family members that were otherwise abusive, also the sexual abuse, and I realized as I was going through my life, and I don't want to spend time on that part of it because I don't think that's the real key. if you're okay with that. I realized that it was something that defined who I was, because then it started me on a journey to want to find healing and deliverance of all of the pain and suffering that all of this brought on in my life. And
Ann Marie, can I interrupt you real quick?
yeah,
When you said a very violent person, are you referring to your mother or your father?
yes, my mother.
Your mother.
Yeah.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
father
Well,
was.
I grew up in an Italian American household, and so it was the other way around. That caught my attention.
Mhm.
And can you elaborate on when you say violent, like physically, verbally, both?
Oh, physical. My mom. We think my mom may have had postpartum psychosis. So
Mhm.
she would literally take a broom to us. She almost killed me one time. Like, literally, she dragged me down the hallway by my hair. I don't even remember what happened after that. You know, bruises and like physically being attacked. On it, you wouldn't even know if it was going to happen. One moment she was fine, and the next moment you could be attacked. I remember running out of my parents' house, and I could hear the screams of my sisters as my mom was taking a broom to them. And I ran back to the house. I mean, as a kid, I ran back to the house thinking I have to help them. But I had run out of the house because it was so violent and so angry, filled with rage, that, but I ran back to help my sisters because I could hear them screaming outside. And it was that type of environment that I grew up in. And then it was like the complete shutdown. My mom would be sitting there, the police would come, and my mom would sit there and say, no, right? You know, parents discipline their children. And the police were like, yes, ma'am, that's true. And in the meantime, my sisters and I are all cowering in the corner, and, you know, the neighbors
Afraid to
could
say
hear.
anything, right?
Yeah.
So this was in your, like, how old were you when this type of abuse was going on, roughly, like ballpark age group?
It probably was when I was a little. I know I had to have been at least 8 or 9. At least that's what I could recall. Maybe 7 or 8 or 9, and then it went all the way until I could stand up to my mom. So like 17 years old.
When was that then?
About
when
17.
You felt like you could stand up to her? 17?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Got it.
And then at that point, though, my sisters and I were old enough to say, this is something we're not standing for. And we really asked our family members. My father, who's an alcoholic, finally had to, you know, cave and get the help that my mom needed. So at that point, when I was 17, things started to change just a little bit for my mom. At least she wasn't as violent as she was when we were younger. She was now completely shut off. So it went from really violent to really shut off. And then, so either way, my sisters and I never really experienced my mother as a mother. It was either we were afraid of her or someone we had to take care of.
So in between that transition from violent to shutting down, was there ever an acknowledgement on her part for how you guys grew up or the abuse or?
No. And neither from my father either. Neither from my father. I remember going to a meeting, like we had to go to some intervention meeting for my mom, and then my sisters and I were talking to our dad, and like, we just wanted you to be our dad. We had nobody to protect us. And you put us in environments where there were people my uncle was a pedophile. There were people that were hurting us, including the people that were taking care of us, and we didn't feel like we had somebody we could turn to. And we actually had a intervention with my dad, and he just sort of sat there. He couldn't take it in. It was too much for him, to acknowledge.
Right. Yeah. Well, he didn't know how to deal with it, probably.
Exactly.
And
He
express
didn't.
his emotions.
Exactly.
Were you able to share this with anyone besides your parents?
Well, we had family that we could share this with, and everybody in the family knew what was going on. Nobody took us in. And so they left it to my parents to still be the parents. Nobody wanted to be involved. And my mom's parents, they were afraid of my mom. They were afraid of my mom. And my mom, I mean, I remember one time we walked in a snowstorm because my mother didn't want to be in our house any longer. And my sisters and I had to walk through a snowstorm on a highway to get to where my dad was working because he owned a bakery. And we had to walk there through the snowstorm with no jackets because my mom was determined that we were going to get to my father, who it was all she could do was focus on my father. And so it was strange. And I don't know why people were hesitant to say anything, or maybe they did and they were talking to them, but nobody really talked to us about it. And so there's a lot of shame on my sisters and my part because we felt there was something wrong with us because people were like, oh, your parents are blah, blah, blah. Your mom is, violent. Your dad's an alcoholic. So you guys must be, what are you guys? And that really, as little kids, that really sat with us for a little while. I'm talking to my sisters now about it. There's still that level of shame that we couldn't do something about it, or that people didn't want to help us or couldn't help us for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. So as you got into adulthood, then how did the relationship, progress with your parents? What did that look like?
Interesting, because actually for many years I lived in Arizona. I moved away when I was 23 to Arizona. I had gotten married, moved to Arizona, and then it was when we returned from Arizona 14 years later that I ended up divorcing my husband and having to move in with my parents. So that was
Oh, wow.
So you have this,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that we didn't talk to them. It's not that we didn't see them when they occasionally could come out with another family member for a visit when my sister got married and such. But there was no relationship there. And it wasn't until this whole thing blew up in my life when I had a divorce that then it all came down to this nitty gritty stuff. Then it all came out. And that is where I recognized, actually I recognized beforehand when I, a couple of years before I moved in with my parents, I had a hysterectomy. And it was at that moment I had, when you're on medication, you're sort of out of it. But I had such an intense vision, dream that it made me realize how forgiveness was so important, because it was like God took me to this person and said, hi, can you love me in this person? Oh, and I'm like, oh, it's my son. I love my son. I love that person. And then as God was showing me face after face after face of the next person, can you love me? But each person was harder to love and harder to connect with. And then I realized what God was saying in that moment is not just love, but can you forgive that person? And it ended up being the last face was the face of my uncle, who,
wow.
as
So
I
this
recall,
is a dream, you're saying? This is all in a dream?
This was like I'd come home from the hospital. It was like a dream or a vision. It was so real. But it like viscerally felt so real that I was looking at the face of God, and God was like, can you love me? And I said,
so this
yeah,
sounds
you're
like
God.
the Charles Dickens process that you went through in your own life, right? The
Yeah.
Charles Dickens story, but this is on forgiveness, right?
Yeah,
That's really
I don't know
interesting.
anything. Yeah, and that's where I feel like the Holy Spirit, like, kind of, oh, there's an opening. She's not rigid. She's, she might be available for a moment while she's in her weakened state. Let's get in there and start working on her. And so really
Right.
that's what happened. And that started me at least exploring forgiveness of who, how I may have hurt somebody and people who have hurt me. And it was, and in that dream, God was like, I am in everyone, and everybody is my child. And even my uncle, who was the pedophile, and I had a hysterectomy. That was why I had surgery. And here I was landing on the guy who sexually touched me, or I don't remember all the details. I just remember certain images that happen, and they're really hard to talk about.
Right.
And so, but landing on that faith and knowing I had a hysterectomy where all my female organs were removed, it was such a moment of connection, of understanding. And I said, yeah, there's something here. And then I started to explore that for myself. And I always loved it. God always has a sense of humor, I think, because he's like, okay, now you're going to divorce your husband and you're going to live with your parents, because in the 10 Commandments, one of those is honor your father and mother. First commandment, honor your father and mother, Yeah. And so I couldn't. I did not honor my parents. I needed help. I walked into that situation, and it was like they needed more help than I needed. And that started a relationship with them that transformed my life.
But Ann Marie, going back to, go ahead, Ann.
I just want to ask you, you had said, you had this incredible vision dream where God was, showing these faces and asking these questions about forgiveness. Had you ever had an experience like that prior to this?
No, I did not. Though I have to say, in 2006, something shifted for me. And when I had that dream, it was in 2009. In 2006, something shifted for me, where it was like I felt like there was more of a spiritual aspect that was really going on in the world within me, and I started to explore that. But it wasn't until I moved back home that it really came to a head. And then the visions started. These visions of Jesus started. And they were so healing. I had a vision of Jesus. We were in a jungle. I was in a cage. And Jesus is walking towards me in this jungle. And he bends down, and like he has to bend down to look into the cage. And he's trying to coax me out of this cage. And I'm like a feral kid. I'm feral. I look dirty, feral child. But he's so gentle and encouraging, and he gets me to come out of this cage. And then he takes me to this pool. And in this pool is this beautiful, fluffy water. And Jesus jumps in, and he's very, happy. And, eventually I jump in the water, and it took time. And these were dreams that came one after the other, and they were progressive. So when I had that dream of my uncle, of God saying, can you love me? It was at that moment, I didn't doubt that it was God at that moment. I didn't doubt that something was impressing itself upon me to pay attention. Because these little vignettes that happened.
Did you feel like at that time you could forgive your uncle? Did you wake up from that feeling like, or knowing that you've forgiven your uncle, or where were you in that process? Because that's, that was a very horrific experience. Where did you go with that when you
Sure. My uncle had passed away.
Before you answer that, I want you to add on to the piece that when you were talking earlier, you said there was an opening and God knew that. And I now can see God in everyone. And so as you're answering Robert's question about were you able to forgive, I also, if so, how do you see God in him? What does that look like to you?
Well, an opportunity. That's really what it looked like for me. And my uncle had passed away. So I had a choice at that moment. And we sometimes don't believe that we have a choice when it comes to forgiveness. We believe that that person has to change so that we can live. But because my uncle had passed away, I could not tell him. I couldn't say anything to him. I couldn't tell him I was going to forgive him. But I went to his daughter, and I included them in dinner coming to my house. I invited his family to my house as a means for myself to say, I forgive. That's how I was able to do that. And his daughter, who didn't know the family, and no one was really talking to them because my uncle was very strange. And so there's a stigma with that. And just as a child, I understood the stigma of where I grew up I understood exactly the stigma of what was going on with my cousin. And I could invite her in, and I could say, I forgive. She doesn't have to know that. She just has to know that she's included. And that's where my process came. It wasn't just about, I didn't need retribution. I didn't need God to say he needed to come down and strike my ankle bed and do all this other stuff. What I really needed, what I really wanted to do was to move forward. And then, to move forward. I needed to move forward, and was only going to do that by, embracing the family that I had, the cousin of my uncle, the daughter of my uncle, my cousin. And that to me was very healing, very healing. If I could be open to her, I could let it go.
Yeah. A lot of strength to be able to do that. So I commend you for that. Was that, I'm just thinking through this in my mind. Was that shortly after you had this dream, this Dickens thing? Was it shortly after that, or okay. So you knew right away that you had to do something.
Yeah.
Okay. I see. And I think that's...
But I think it was beyond just intellectually knowing you've got to do something. Like you felt a feeling inside that you had to do something.
Exactly.
And what is so beautiful about what you said is, many times we say, well, I'll do this when, and that's like a form of trading in a sense. And that took, like Robert said, a lot of courage on your part to actually let go, like to really let go and surrender. And that's really beautiful.
Thank you. And I'm telling you, God hadn't, it's funny, my son's like, oh, you love God because you were going through a hard time. I said, I love God, and he took me through a hard time. God gets us through hard times. And the Holy Spirit has been with me. And I laugh about it with my friends. I have a few friends that are totally Holy Spirit junkies, so to speak. But we recognize the moments. There are these moments, these teachable moments that happen that if you can slow down your life enough, you'll see them.
But was there a time, I would guess, that's just filled with anger and questioning why? Like, why me? It wasn't one thing that you experienced. It was multiple. And I'm just curious, like,
I never
what
asked
part
that
of your
question.
life, really?
Never. Because it happened. To say why me would have kept me in a place of feeling like a victim.
Right.
It was something that happened. How do I want to deal with it now? How do I, and asking God to help me deal with this now. If I stayed as a victim, I would have just been poor me. And yes, there are times when people feel that, and I probably did feel that way. But I didn't let that be the direction I wanted to take. The feeling that I wanted, that would guide me. Because if that was the feeling that, if I was going to have God guide me, the way I had these dreams of Jesus, he was not guiding me to be a victim. He was guiding me to be somebody that would be a participator in life. It's like we have this beautiful life, and these things, terrible things happen. If we can work through those terrible things, it's like life expands so much more. Do I regret what, my childhood? It was my childhood. I didn't have another one. So if I was to die, in 80 years, would I want to, would I say regret having my parents that I had? No, because they were my parents. I learned to love them as they were. And when I lived with my parents, which was horrible in and of itself, because my father, when I moved into my parents' house, it was like, I walked into that and I said, my God, these guys need help. And I got to see firsthand the love that my mother really had for me, for my son who moved in with us, for my father, that when I remember one time after my dad died, I was yelling at my mom, and I wanted her to feel everything that I had felt as a child. And I said, "You hurt me. You used to beat me." She goes, I would never beat you. I would never hurt you." And the look of total pain and suffering on her face, there was this moment where I felt like God said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And it was at that moment I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm looking for retribution," and it made me stop. I started crying. My mom started crying, and it was like healing because I could let her go. I wanted my mother. I wanted her to be a mother, and she never could. But by living with them, she was my mother, and I could learn and to accept her for who she was.
Right. Yeah, because we're not going to change that. I think there's a lot of people get stuck with that anger and all those negative emotions, and they can't let go, and it keeps them locked into a prison, and you're able to do that. I think one of the things I heard that you were doing, Ann Marie, is you were asking better questions. Instead of why me, why was I the victim, you started asking the opposite, and there's always the answer, right? For every question we ask, there's an immediate answer. We get it. God, I believe God gives it to us. But you were looking for a way to turn this into something positive and find peace and love, and so that's what you got. That's what you found, right? Seek and you shall find.
It did, and here was a great visual. One time I was talking to a counselor, and she's like, "Pretend you're putting your hands on the throat of this person you hate, you're angry with, and that they have their hands on your throat, and you're locked in this battle of choking each other to death. But what if you let go of your hands? What would that do for you?" I said, "Well, it would give me the chance to step back," and that's what happened. Spiritually, metaphorically speaking, letting go of the throat of my mother or father or anybody that I felt I needed to forgive, I was able to take a step back. I was able to take a breath. I was able to then make a different choice. And it was such a great visual that I remember that to this day.
So how did you say that again, Ann Marie? What did they tell you to do?
Imagine having your hands around the throat of the person you don't want to forgive, and having their hands around you, around your throat. So you're both locked, strangling each other. But what if you let your hands go of that person? Then you could take a step back. And so that's the image that I got. And it's interesting because I have found through my experiences these moments, these little nuggets of visual. I'm a visual person. So that's a really strong visual. And that really, when to learn how to let go was, wow, I want to breathe. I want to live. I want to, I want to take a step back from this. And that really was a powerful thing for me to do.
Metaphor. Yeah, it's a metaphor.
Yeah.
I like that visual because when you talk about letting go and you said you step back, you were able to really step back in a neutral state, not getting emotionally involved with the negativity of it, but then you also allow the other person the opportunity to step back.
Have you ever felt like?
Yes.
with me, yeah.
No, I'm curious. Can I ask where your siblings are on their forgiveness journey? I mean, I'm sure your example is inspiring.
Well, truthfully, we've had some really interesting conversations, my sisters and I. And maybe they're not exactly where I am in their forgiveness journey. However, the conversations have been amazing. So I know that they've had moments where they've been able to take away things And it's interesting because we've dealt with trauma. I have a twin who's the same age as myself. And then I have, of course, because she's my twin. So, but then I have a little younger sister and then a younger sister. And, so each of us have had different experiences with our parents. And, just having these open conversations about this, at first it was very uncomfortable. My sisters didn't want to talk about that. They're like, "You living in the past." I said, "I'm not living in the past. I'm dealing with what the past happened, and now I want to live in the present moment." And so by taking that stand, of that centered stand, it has helped having to have other conversations with my sisters, which in a way has brought us a bit closer together. And so, yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I'll get a call from my twin who lives in Texas out of the blue, and she'll want to talk about the trauma that we experienced, but that it becomes like a healing conversation. And so that's what we've experienced. We've had some of that experience. Yeah, it's been amazing.
Well, you obviously have inspired them. They're watching you and they're learning from you. What about your son? You mentioned a son. Do you have other children?
Mm-hmm. I have two sons. I have one who's 28 and one who's 19. And my 28-year-old stayed with his father when we moved out. And my youngest son, who's now 19, he moved out with me. And so they don't have that same experience about what they only saw my parents. Specifically, we're talking about my parents here. They only saw my parents when I was living with them in a way that, but my youngest son developed such a relationship with my mom. He connected with her in such a way that nobody else could, not even I. And you could see what she showed him was this love poured out, that I knew that if my mom hadn't been sick, that love would have been poured out on our children. So it was so wonderful. And when my mom had cancer, and here's a very interesting story. My mom had breast cancer, and when she was going through treatment, one day she just said, "Hi, can I go with you when you take your son to school?" And I said, I was taking the high school once a week, and he'd have breakfast. And so then my mom, we started asking questions. I know that it may be a problem that I'm going with you, but do you mind? And he said, no. And she's like, "What's this building here? And what's this?" It was almost like she opened up for the first time in years, and she's asking us questions, dating, how's the neighborhood? I mean, it was like all of a sudden she came out from under the water, so to speak, and had a breath, and then was engaged, was laughing. Her personality was amazing. It was beautiful. And then a few months later, the real mother came out.
Well, there's we're all buried under this virus code, and maybe she was just able to release all that, and you saw a glimpse of who she really was, and her soul, who she was from inside, who God made her to really be. But through
that was the best gift.
Whatever she went through, we don't, maybe you're not aware, and we're not aware of what our parents went through before we came along, and their social environment and who they were around and how they were raised, and it made them who they were. But that's awesome that you were able to get a glimpse of that. I bet that was, made you feel really good.
It was amazing. And my son just walked in. Hello. You might have to edit that out. But yes, it was wonderful. And even my sisters were talking about it. It was like we had our mother back for a short amount of time. And the gift that, you weren't left with what was, you were left with this beautiful spirit, this beautiful person. And that was the takeaway. That was lovely.
Right.
Absolutely
That's
lovely.
really neat. So Kelly likes to always ask this question. I think it might be a good time.
Well, I actually have two questions before I get to the last one. So sometimes these challenges, circumstances, situations, it's considered like we're in the valley, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we're broken up in the valley, but sometimes the valley is also the making of us. And if you look back from, your early childhood to where you are now, like, and if you're using the metaphor as the valley and you've been broken up and it's been the making of you, you know, what was the making of you through the valley? Like, I guess, coming through that, who did you become?
Became kinder.
Hmm.
There's a prayer that I have, and I say to God, take me to the heart of the matter, take me to the root cause, and see me through to the other side. And
Hmm.
I became a kinder person. I feel I became um, empathetic person. I became a person that was ready to smile or listen to someone who might have been struggling. Uh, Taking the time, slowing my life down, and I feel I became like a whole person from that experience, not just a half, not just pieces and parts that were missing, but I feel, what is that? That Japanese design where you have broken pieces and they
Hmm.
fill it with gold.
Yes.
That's what I felt like. Like God took these broken pieces and put me together, and it's filled with gold, and I just feel so much more whole as a
Hmm.
person.
Wow, I appreciate you sharing that very much, because my next question was about the prayer. You had said that you had been led to become um, a prayer leader at your church, and it's
Mm-hmm.
allowed you to really invite the Holy Spirit in. And the prayer, like you just said, take me to the heart of the matter or to the root cause of the problem and let God fill the space with healing.
Mm-hmm.
But the space has to be open for Him to fill
Mm-hmm.
it. And so I loved what you just shared. You had also mentioned that God, wants to be a part of our lives, and forgiveness brings Him closer. Or, I'm sorry, forgiveness brings us closer to Him. So I do like to ask our guest, if you would share with the audience what your definition, what your experience, what it looks like, feels like, forgiveness for you in your life.
Forgiveness to me feels like a cool breeze on a summer day. It feels easy. It isn't easy when you're doing it, but when you go through the experience, it feels brighter, happier. I feel like not chained. I feel unencumbered. I feel free. I feel open. I feel joyful. It's like we've got the fruit of the spirit. It brings out all of the fruit of the spirit when you find forgiveness. Jesus forgave us, but we we can do the same thing. We can do the same thing. We're always, we are not perfect. I am not perfect, and I probably have hurt some people. Which again, it's a never ending cycle that I have found to be lighter, happier, in a more centered space, more allowing of people's stuff. There's a lot of people out there who don't mean to hurt people, and there's a lot of people who do. And you can find ways to forgive both. And you don't have to be in the same space as the person that continues to try to hurt you. But you know that you can let that person go and then live your life. It's like I realized that what God was telling me was to live life. Where's my gratitude? Like, let's have some gratitude. Like, find ways to be grateful. Find ways to be thankful. Find ways to forgive someone's slight. If they're having a bad day and they're mean to you, there's grace in that. And that to me has changed my life. It's extending a bit of grace in a moment because I know there are days when I have a hot temper because I am Italian. And, I could say something that could be cruel or mean. And, I'm hoping that someone would extend that to me as well, a bit of grace. And
Well,
so, yeah.
you used a word with repetition a lot, and it was the word find. And And sometimes we do have to find forgiveness, and it's not always easy, but it is always there. And your story, I just want to again thank you for being a guest. And I'm really, I just want to acknowledge how much courage it takes to come on and tell your story. But your story, I'm sure, has inspired our listeners to really go find forgiveness in their lives.
Yeah, and Ann Marie, have you ever thought about turning your story into a book?
Well, someone else has mentioned that.
Everyone has at least one book in them. I know that. So I would love to see you do that. And I want to echo Kelly's sentiments. I really appreciate you coming on, because this is how people learn and grow. And that's why hopefully they're coming here, and to learn to listen. But you really shared something I think very valuable, how you were able to work through all this, and your mindset, because I think that's the mindset, is everything. Because I think I love this quote by Wayne Dyer, who said, change the way you look at something, and what you look at changes. And you were able to do that over time. And no, it's not easy. And I know a lot of people will say, because we've discussed this here many times, well, yeah, but, that was her, but you don't know me, and you don't know my story. And what do you do, because you're talking to people probably, and you're trying to help them with this topic. What do you say to somebody that says that to you? Like, well, good for you, basically, but you don't understand what I've gone through.
I guess what I recognize when that happens is I don't apologize for how my life transformed, and try to make someone understand that, because people are they know what they know, and if they don't know any different, I guess my thought at that moment was a seed planted. And if a seed is planted, I'm not actively looking to share my story with everybody, but when people ask me about it, and just, I sometimes share just certain vignettes about something, and they're like, tell me more. Why did you do that? And how did that experience happen and show up for you? And, it's that moment of sharing, these little seeds, right? So this is a wonderful podcast because it shows seeds where people have had real issues and how they've overcome those challenges and been able to find pieces in themselves. And that piece carries on to other areas of your life. Whatever you do in one area of your life, it's going to kind of show up in other areas of your life.
Right.
And so just making it normal. It's normal. It's normal to want to hold on, and it's normal to forgive. And when you learn to let go, it's like, wow, I can live. And I don't try to tell people that they should try to forgive. I say it's all going to be in the timing of your own life. But if you decide you want to have a conversation and you just want me to listen, I'll listen. That's what's so great about prayer. When I'm praying with people, people are sharing some serious stuff, and I'm just listening. And I'm a witness to what their pain is. And then I just give it to the Holy Spirit. I'm like, I'm just asking you to take this to the heart of this person's matter here, and need you to step in, into what capacity they can receive, and then work with them. They're coming because they've asked. I'm asking God on their behalf. So that's what my prayer, that's how I pray for people at church. Praying for people, using me as a vehicle to be God's hands and feet and ears so that people can share their story. And then when they feel that sense of acceptance, even if they said they've done horrible things, but just feeling that they are accepted, and that's not just me being accepting, it's God inside me being accepting. They feel that.
Right.
And then they start sharing more. It's amazing.
Well, there's a lot of wisdom what you just said.
A lot.
So I appreciate that. And it made me think back to the dream you had when God brought you to these people and asked you, could you forgive? Could you forgive? Because that's where it starts. So, well, Ann Marie, thanks so much again for being on Time for Forgiveness. I really enjoyed it. You inspired me. I need to be a better listener, by the way. I know that. And Kelly is an amazing listener, just like you. So, but I think that opens the space. I mean, that's what came to me. Like you know, I can already tell you're very good at opening the space with people, so they feel that they can walk in that, you know, open that door and go in there, and then you're going to be able to help them. But you've turned it over, and I think that's a great message for the audience, don't you, honey? That like we don't have to always have all the answers. That's what I hear you saying. Like you're good at, you know, you turn it over to the Holy Spirit and you listen and you wait, and God never fails. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you for the opportunity to share this.
Absolutely, yeah. No, this was great. I mean, this is ideas, wisdom. Ann Marie had it all today. So for everybody out there, you know, if you're inspired and you want to come on and share a story like Ann Marie has, again, you can go to our website, Time for Forgiveness, and there's a spot where you can just put in your email, and we'll reach out to you. But until then, we're inspired today, and Ann Marie, go out and continue doing what you're doing. And if we're going to help you in some way or give back to you, please reach out to us. I do believe you'd have a fantastic book if you ever feel inspired to do that. I would love to see you do that at some point, and we'd love to help with that as well. So,
and we'll buy your first copy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really inspired by you, and I want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for being so courageous, because your story, I know, is going to impact so many.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, everyone, until the next episode of Time for Forgiveness, keep learning and growing and inspiring other people like Ann Marie has today, and we'll see you soon.